Welcome to Smart Architectural Programming, your go-to place for clean code, smart design, and solid programming foundations. And today's topic is a continuation of our Java series on our YouTube channel. And if you're following along on our Introduction to Java book, this is the third video of chapter 4. And in this video, we'll be covering switch statements in Java as well as switch expressions, what they are, how to use them, and when to choose one over the other. This is a slightly unique topic in the sense that we don't have different types of switch statements or switch expressions in other languages, and this is a unique aspect to Java that we'll be going over. So basically, to start off, we need to understand that if you're diving in Java, you've probably seen some code like this. Basically, you've seen code like this appearing and people actually working on that. So if you see a code like this, basically what you need to understand here is that this is a switch statement. It lets you branch logic based on the value of a variable, usually an int, char, enum, or even a string. It has been around since the early days of Java, but in Java 14 and beyond, it got an upgrade, which were switch expressions that we'll be covering further down the line. So before we move forward, let's cover some of the basics of switch statements. So if you break down a classic switch statement, you use case labels to match values, and each block runs until it hits a break, or it keeps running through the next case. This is called fall through, basically. What do we mean by that? So each block runs until it hits the break statement. So if you don't have any break statement in any case, it would go over all the cases, and if there are multiple case matches, it would do multiple case matches. But if it has a break statement, as you can see on line 6 here, it means that it would not allow for, it would not basically, if case 2 is matched, it would run case 2's code, and it would break out of the switch case statement block, which means case 3, even if case 3 is being matched, it won't run case 3. So that is what a break statement is doing here. And that is what we mean by fall through, that if there's no break statement, it will move on to the next case and keep on running any case that it fulfills the requirements of. Also, a quick note here would be that you should notice how case 1 and case 2 both print below average. That's fall through behavior, basically. That's fall through behavior because because there's no break statement that we can see in case 1, which means even if case 1 is matched, it would fall through basically to case 2, basically. Right? And this is useful but risky if you forget to use the break, because you don't want, in most cases, you don't want multiple cases to be executed at the same time. That's something that you're not looking to do, or if you're looking to do that, that's in a very rare cases. So always remember to use break statements in switch case breaks unless you want multiple cases to run at the same time on that switch case break. Now that we understand switch statement basics, let's circle back to the basics of switch expressions. That's also something that came in Java 14, which was an upgrade to this. So when you enter switch expressions, you can see these are modern versions of switch statements, right? They're concise, clear, and they return a value simply. And you notice the syntax here is that we have a case with an arrow and then the code or the output that we need to execute, right? So as you can see, it's clean to the point, no break, no fall through, and now it acts like an actual expression. It returns a value. What does it mean? If you look at the screen here, no fall through means that if one case is true, no other case would be run, right? That is the case. And you'll notice something different here as well. There's a default statement right at the end. Basically, if none of the cases match, a default statement would run either way, basically. So that's a simple, concise, clean switch expression in Java that came out since Java 14. Now that we understand that, we also need to understand what is the difference between these two, right? We've learned about these two individually and how we execute them, how we run them, what are the basic fundamentals of each of these statements. But the question here remains is, what is the difference between them, right? We have both of these are we can use, but what is the difference between them? So if you look at the table here, you could say switch statements were introduced on the first Java version, and switch expressions were introduced in Java 14, but they were finalized in Java 17. In switch statements, there's no need to return a value. while switch expressions must return a value. When you talk about fall through, switch statements have fall through by default, and switch expressions do not have fall through. If you talk about syntax, the syntax of switch statements is verbose, while the syntax of switch expressions is concise and to the point. And because of fall through, does these do these require break statements? So switch statements, because of fall through, require break statements, while switch expressions, because they don't have any fall through, do not require break statements. And finally, the word yield. Can the switch statements use yield? No. And can switch expressions use yield? Yes, switch expressions can use yield, but we'll come back to that later. So let's move forward now that we understand what the basic difference is here. So now let's understand yield. That is unique to the switch expressions, right? That's something you saw in that table earlier and that you probably don't make sense of. It didn't make sense to you, basically, right? As to why we have something called yield in switch expressions, what not in switch statements. As a matter of fact, what is yield? Basically, with yield, you can use a multi-line logic inside a case, right? Pretty handy for complex conditions. So if you have noticed something like, and I'm pretty sure sharp programmers out there might have noticed this already, is that in most cases with switch case expressions that we showed you earlier, it was just returning simple values. There wasn't any complex logic that we could add there, unlike switch statements where you could add complex coding logic within the switch statements. So here you can understand that with yield, we can do multi-line logic inside a case, right? So the yield is a keyword that's used to do complex actions within the switch case expressions in Java. So that is the utility of yield. So as you can see, that's how yield is being used here. So let's move on to the next thing, which is when to use what, right? We need to understand exactly when to use switch case expressions, when to use switch case statements, right? What's the difference, right? So you use switch expressions. I'm going to go over the modern one because in my opinion, if a new thing comes in, that should be your go-to utility in most cases until there's something unique that or something niche that you might not want to use switch expressions on. So switch expressions as the more advanced form of switch statements is something that you should use by default, right? And only switch to switch statements when you feel that there's a specific niche aspect that switch expressions can't handle or switch statements can handle better. But generally speaking, if you want a general rule of thumb, there's three things you need to remember on which you need to use switch expressions, which is you need to assign a value based on a condition, right? You have multiple conditions that you need to test for, and if certain condition is true, then you want to assign a certain value to a variable. That's one condition number one when you need to use switch expressions other than switch statements. You want clearer, safer code without fall through. Again, as I mentioned, this condition is not even, you don't even need to pay attention to it, because what this ultimately implies is that you switch expressions because it's covering for a very huge issue in switch statements. And so by default, you switch expressions unless you have to use switch statements. And finally, when you're using Java 14 or ideally Java 17, always use switch expressions. So it like circles back to the fact that other than assigning value use case, use switch expressions 99% of the times unless there's a niche that where you want to use switch statements. And here it's pretty much on switch statement side, it's also implying the same thing. If you're working with an older Java version, you want to you need to basically if you're this particular condition means that just use switch expressions, don't use switch statements. And when I talk about niche, the next 2 points talk about the niche on when you can or should use switch statements. You want to run side effects only, and you need fall through logic intentionally. So here what it means, if you want to run multiple cases at the same time in a single switch case statement, that's when you use switch statements. That's the only use case when you use switch statements. As a matter of fact, that is the rarity of that is the rare occasion when you use switch statements. Every other time, 99% of the time, use switch expressions instead, because that is a better and more robust form that developers created. You need to understand that when a certain syntax is deprecated, or even if it's not deprecated, there's a more it's improved upon with the new feature, the reason it's done is not for programmers who have nothing better to do and spend their time creating new features for you. It's done because programmers understand that this particular issue or this particular feature needs to be improved. There's certain issues with it, certain problems it creates when programming, so they come to try to remove those problems with the new update. And that is what switch expressions do in comparison to switch statements. So always remember that. So now that we have that, let's do a quick recap of what we've covered in this particular video. We've covered switch statements, which are classic but can be verbose and risky due to fall-through errors. And we've covered switch expressions, which are modern, safe, and great for returning values. If you're writing clean, readable code, switch expressions are your new best friend. So always use them. Pro tip, pair switch expressions with enums for elegant control flow. Now that we have wrapped up this video, want to see more Java deep dives or continue for seeing a Java playlist? Look into our Java playlist basically. And don't forget to grab a copy of our official textbook, Introduction to Java, for more in-depth and clear understanding to the fundamentals of Java. Like, subscribe, and click the bell so you never miss an episode of Smart Architectural Program. With that, we're going to wrap up our video and we'll see you in our next video. So hang tight and keep coding.